When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread. We are going to be doing Ned IX in today's video. Now, very different from last week's video, I hope you all enjoyed that one, was that it was I think the longest that we've done so far. Now, today's video is going to be rather short. It's a very short Ned chapter, albeit it may be short, it is an extremely important one. And when you look at how the last chapter ended with Catelyn having her discussion with Lysa, it really puts a lot more into context why that event needed to happen before this chapter. Because this chapter, albeit again is very small, it takes basically Littlefinger and Ned continuing what they were going to do at the end of the last Ned chapter with going to the brothel to run another one of Robert's bastards, and then we're going to see tensions start to rise as, again, Jaime looks to protect Tyrion. And so that is going to cause an event, and we're kind of getting into the end times for Ned. So very crucial chapter, and I am excited to get into it. And we will start today's video on page 378. Also, just as a reminder, don't get confused by the background image. Ned is not the Hand of the King anymore. And this is just a different time in the show than what's actually happening in the book. I just couldn't find a lot of great images of Ned and Littlefinger during this point of the show. But let's get into page 378. The chapter begins with Ned and Jory finding Littlefinger in a brothel. He was currently chatting with a woman with skin as black as ink. Maybe, again, a woman from the Summer Isles, not sure on that. Ned notes that half her clothes are off, and most of Littlefinger's are as well. Ned seems to be having enough of this already. Again, he is someone that does not like brothels. This is just kind of out of Ned's element. And so he kind of wants to hurry this along. And there's also kind of, again, some missing information as we're going to do something we see with Dany chapters quite a lot. Like, we're going to go back before as what happened before we kind of jumped into the chapter. But just as some context, Ned has been here basically investigating one of Robert's bastards, and this is kind of the back end of that. He tells Jory it is time to pack up and leave. Jory says he will go and get the horses, and Littlefinger again is very lazy and slow to get up and basically leave as well, as he's joking with the woman he is with. He comes over to Ned and basically says, is it his business that is done, or Robert's? As once again, they find another one of Robert's bastards. Littlefinger then makes a jest saying that the hand rules with the king's voice and fights by the king's sword. But does he... We're not going to use that word since, very early on in the video, and YouTube doesn't like those. More or less, does he use the king's private parts? And he is cut off by Ned before he can finish. So again, this will get us into page 379. Not anything too important in this first page, but that will get us to continue on. Ned states that he is thankful for his help, as it might have taken years to find this brothel. Again, it kind of points to the image of how many brothels there are in King's Landing, how big of a business this is within King's Landing, and why when you think about a character like Stannis trying to outlaw this, it makes sense why there's so much like uproar, because this is a vital part. Whereas, again, if you look at something like for us, right, fast food restaurants, or I don't know, think of a hobby of yours, and suddenly it just closed down. That's kind of the way this feels, where it's just an integral part of society at this point, which is not great. And Ned is kind of, he doesn't want to put up with Littlefinger's mockery anymore. And also he notes that he is no longer the hand, again, referring to Littlefinger's comment in the last page. But Littlefinger fires back that the wolf is a prickly one, which he's not wrong. Jory then comes around with young Weil with the horses, and Ned notes that is a starless black sky. Jory then asks if they will be going back to the castle, to which Ned agrees they will. Littlefinger then notes that Chaitaya, I hope I said that right, runs a choice establishment, and he has half a mind to buy it. And continues stating that he has always found that whores were a better investment than ship, because everyone whores and pays good coin for it. Again, showing how vital this business is to not only King's Landing, but to Westeros as a whole. Where, again, we see that Littlefinger is buying up these brothels. He's taken a very keen interest in this business, and it makes a perfect sense why. It's one of the leading businesses to get into, and so that just kind of reinforces that idea. Ned lets Littlefinger continue on, but eventually they ride in silence, with the rain falling on their head. And this is another reason why the last chapter is so important, because Ned thinks back on Robert's first bastard, Maya Stone, who we just met in the last chapter. Now, again, us, the audience, do not know this yet. It's not like been established yet, but you can kind of put 2 and 2 together as you're reading. And it's a perfect, again, point for George and why that last chapter was so long. He thinks about how when Rickard Stark, his father, had promised Lyanna to Robert, Lyanna had noted that Robert will never keep to one bed, as Robert had already had one bastard so young. Again, Robert has Maya very young, like in his teenage years. And so Lyanna is kind of dead on the mark here. As we see and we go forward, Robert whores a lot. He has a lot of bastards. He is someone that is very lusty, and he is not... And Lyanna, I think, is very much right to think that if this guy did marry me, what would change? And so I think that's an interesting point. Now, you could make the argument here that the reason Robert is so lusty now is because he finds no satisfaction in his marriage. He does not love Cersei. He loves Lyanna. Well, he loves the idea of Lyanna, and that void he fills with whoring. And you could maybe make an argument there, but I do think Lyanna is right. Now, I want to point this out again. We're going to start talking about in this chapter right before kind of the Jaime stuff pops up about the idea of bastards and Robert's bastards, but we're also thinking about, again, Lyanna. And I just want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind. I try to, whenever I think there's a segment in one of these chapters, especially Ned ones, where there's foreshadowing to R+L, I try to kind of leave, put that into your mind before we start going further into it. Ned had tried to convince her, saying, once married, it will be different, and he will love her. And Lyanna has the perfect counter. I think it's one of the best quotes of the story, but love is sweet, but it cannot change a man's true nature. And I think I kind of agree. Like, think about the idea of when you are getting in a relationship with someone, or, you love someone, eventually that first kind of honeymoon phase of the relationship ends, and you start to kind of see who that person is. It's one of the reasons where if you're, going to marry someone, usually you want to like move in with them for a while, because you'll find out so much more by living with them. And that's kind of what Lyanna is kind of saying here, right? That it doesn't matter, how Robert treats her in the beginning. Eventually his nature is going to come out. And I think this is also interesting when looking at Lyanna's fate, where Lyanna is a character that inherently went with how her nature was. She was a wild child. She wasn't to be controlled. She did kind of what she wanted. She runs off with Rhaegar, and that's something that really affects the kingdoms deeply. Ned then thinks back to the brothel, and he had dared not to ask her age, again showing how young this young lady was. But Ned notes that no doubt she had been a virgin, and with enough coin, any brothel could get you one, which is very interesting, because it also points to the idea of how important virginity is, how, and especially in this society, we see this with women especially. It's not as much a thing for men in this society. And we see this, again, this is just something in our own culture that George kind of picked from. If you even look, like, I took a class last semester at my college, and it was about Renaissance Italy. This is very much reflected in that history, right? Where if a woman was not a virgin, their stock for a marriage partner went down. And so when you see this idea that, you're going to a brothel and you want a virgin, it's kind of like odd, right? You're already doing something that is out of, wedlock, things like that. It just kind of shows that double standard for men and women when it comes to the idea of sex in this world. Also shows, in another way, really the way the brothel like business has grown. How do you satisfy a customer to make them keep coming back? Because you think about these people, maybe they become immune to just normal sex. When you're getting it just like this, you're paying for someone to do it. How do you kind of spice it up and keep bringing people in? That'll lead us into page 380. Ned notes how she had red hair and freckles everywhere, but the baby was certainly Robert's, having the same dark hair that reminds him of Maya when he held her. Now, I think something that's really important to remember is red hair is something that's very rare, especially in our world, but even, in Westeros as well. And that's a very distinct quality, but yet this child still has this darker hair of the Baratheons. But then you turn to Robert's children and none of them have that. Again, a nice little nudge to where Ned should be going with this rationale. She says she named the child Bara and requests that Ned will tell the king how beautiful she was. Ned said he would and planned to keep the promise, albeit it would do nothing. Again, it didn't really matter. And also Ned was not in a good relationship with Robert right now. So I don't know, this would be kind of odd, especially when they're fighting. Just be like, oh yeah, I met your bastard kid and I was promised to tell you how beautiful they are. But yeah, just a interesting comment. And you see again how young this woman is, especially when you think about like, what is that going to do? Like, Robert isn't really going to come back to her, especially like when he met you and got you pregnant in a brothel. It's just kind of a weird idea. But I want you guys to remember at this point, when we're talking about bastards, we're talking about, children that were made out of wedlock or things of that nature. And here is Ned, who again remembers Lyanna on her deathbed and the promises he had made her and the price that he had paid to keep it. So what promise could be so impactful that it affected Ned quite a lot? You look at the idea of the way Ned and Jon's relationship, how was Jon, birthed? It's a stain on Ned's honor and legacy, even though Jon isn't his child. So it's an interesting little point there. Also, you look at just hiding the idea of the Robert's Rebellion, what sparked it, knowing that Lyanna and Rhaegar willingly ran off. It wasn't something that he kidnapped her. The woman then that was in the brothel then continues by saying that she had been with no one else, just waiting for Robert, and for Ned to tell Robert that. Again, we get this idea that this woman has basically not been doing her normal brothel work. Because of this, the person in charge, Chaitea, I don't know how to say her name, but more or less, she has given her like half a year, basically off. And so again, we just see some really naivety from this woman, which again makes sense. And she even continues saying that Robert was always good to her and that the child will not go without wanting. Now, I think this is an interesting idea. Like, how is Ned supposed to guarantee that he's not going to be in King's Landing anymore? How is he supposed to provide for this child like he's promising her, unless this is just a straight up lie? I just think it's an interesting little point. Now, what I really think here is more foreshadowing to Jon's parentage. We have this idea that the bastard child reminded him of Jon. And if the gods were so down on bastards, why did they fill men with such lusts? Now, you could look at this at a couple like ways. One is that Jon's mother was just someone that got the best of Ned, that filled him with lust. But what I think is really going on here is this idea of what filled Rhaegar to, again, go after Lyanna, and that idea of lust, which is not inherently actually true, right? We know that Rhaegar had other things going on there. So I thought that was another interesting point. Ned then comes back to the present and asks Littlefinger how much he knows about Robert's bastards. And Littlefinger really just kind of dances around this question. Like Littlefinger obviously knows what's going on, but he kind of dances around this question. He says he has more than you, and Ned wants the actual numbers. And Littlefinger again dances around the question, saying, what does it matter? He has slept with a lot of women. He is bound to have a lot of bastards. But he starts with Edric is one. He is claimed again publicly as he was conceived on Stannis' wedding night, when Robert had sex with a cousin of Selyse Florent. Renly even notes that Robert had taken the girl up to Stannis' wedding bed and done the deed. Again, when we get to Stannis in book 2, this is something that really is a stain on Stannis, right? This is supposed to be Stannis' big night. He's getting married. And here is Robert taking, his wedding bed. Again, it's just this idea that the attention can never be on Stannis. Stannis is that prototypical middle child. He really doesn't get any attention. It's all going to, his older brother or his younger brother. It's never on Stannis. And it's just another one of those slights that we see that he feels Robert has done to him. And that'll get us into page 381. Again, Stannis took this as a stain on his honor and pride and shipped the boy off to Renly. It makes perfect sense. Littlefinger then continues that when Robert went west for Lord Tywin's tourney, he got a woman pregnant that gave him twins. But Cersei had them killed and the woman sold into slavery. Which, like Ned thinks, Ned doesn't really know if this actually happened, or even if it was Cersei who did it, who, again, he believes she could do that. But again, we have no evidence to support this. Cersei doesn't really think about it. So I am kind of curious, what do you guys think about these twins? I was maybe under the possibility that maybe Tywin could have done it. But I think the problem with that idea would be, okay, Tywin seems completely under the idea that Robert and Cersei's children are legitimate. Like, he doesn't even think about Jaime being the father of those children. So for that to kind of hold up, this wouldn't have been able to be done by Tywin. So again, I wonder if this actually did happen. We just do not know. Maybe that's something that George can give us more information on as we maybe go to the Westerlands. Ned could believe this of Cersei, but would Robert allow it? But this is, I think, what the weirdest part is, that Ned thinks that Robert would have any knowledge of this. That's what I think is interesting here, is that this would all go under Robert's nose, of course. And Ned kind of says maybe he turned a blind eye to things like this, but I just don't think Ned knew. I think it's just as simple as this. But then this all leads Ned back to the point. Why would Jon Arryn start investigating Robert's children? Littlefinger shrugs it off, saying that maybe he just wanted to treat those children well, which Ned doesn't think so. But he has no idea himself. But at this moment, we get the famous plot hole line. Everyone knows this is my favorite line in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. But Ned says that he had not thought, Ned thinks that he had not thought of Rhaegar in years. But he found himself thinking if Rhaegar frequented brothels, and he thinks he did not. Now, I've explained this in multiple videos as to why this doesn't make any sense. The first of those reasons is he's thought about Lyanna multiple times and on her deathbed, yet he doesn't think of Rhaegar. And we just got a line where he's thinking about, like, the idea of Jon being a bastard and the lusts of men, which would, again, go to the father. And so this line just doesn't make sense inherently, because we also know that Ned has told stories about Robert's Rebellion. How do you tell a story of Robert's Rebellion without Rhaegar? It just doesn't make any sense logically from any point. I know people have tried to argue like, oh yeah, this still makes sense in context, even with R+L, but it really doesn't to me. I just think this is a poorly written line by George that maybe he just didn't think about at this point. I don't know. This line doesn't make any sense. Even if you like are a Ned and Ashara person or any other like Jon parentage theory, this line is still a plot hole for so many reasons that I've explained. Ned thinks that Rhaegar probably didn't, which would imply that Ned knew Rhaegar was not someone that was just about lust. So that would kind of lead us to this idea that maybe Ned knows that Rhaegar actually had some sort of thing with Lyanna, because if you're going off of what the base story is that Rhaegar captured Lyanna, that would have suggested that Rhaegar was lusting after Lyanna, kidnapping her. But it isn't, right? And Ned thinks about that and says that Rhaegar was not really that lusty. He didn't frequent brothels. So why capture Lyanna if not he was in love with her? So again, this chapter really focuses, I think, a lot of heavy foreshadowing on the parentage of Jon. But yeah, don't want to go overboard with this. But at this moment, Jory announces soldiers coming towards them, all with armor on and the sigil of the Lannister lion. Now, I do want to note something before we get into this actual confrontation. Get the show's version of these events out of your head. They're vastly different in the way these events happen. So yeah, I just want to kind of put that out there. But Ned notes there are about 10 men in front of them, all with long swords and iron-tipped spears pointing at them. Wilde gives out a warning that there are also men behind them blocking their escape. Jordan draws his sword, saying, "Move out of the way or die." Jaime notes that the wolves have started howling, but they are such a small pack. Again, a nice little kind of reference to the idea that when the pack is divided and they are scattered, they're easy to pick off. But a large pack, like he's talking about with Arya, can't be killed. And so Ned's kind of been caught at a very difficult situation. He only has 2 men with him and Littlefinger. Littlefinger, again, this is all for Littlefinger to save face, to gain Ned's trust, to show, oh, I'm not on Lannister's side, I'm on your side, Ned. Littlefinger asks, what is the meaning of this? And states that Ned is the king's hand. Jamie retorts back saying he was the king's hand. Now he's not so sure what he is. Littlefinger says this is madness, and what does he think he's doing? Ned remarks he knows exactly what he's doing. Again, Ned is not an idiot. Ned knows what this is about. He knows that Jamie is coming here about Tyrion's capture, and this is meant to be more or less a threat. Jamie agrees, asking Ned if he remembers his brother. His brother was fair-haired with mismatched eyes, sharp of tongue, and a short man. It seems that he found some terrible trouble on the road, and his lord father is awfully worried. Ned says that he was taken on his command to answer for his crimes, and this was not the words to say to Jamie. Jamie draws his sword and tells Ned he will kill him like Ares if he needs to, but I would rather you die with steel in your hand. At this, Jamie tells Littlefinger to leave unless he wants his nice clothes bloodied. Littlefinger did not need to be told twice. Again, just that nice little wink here that, yes, Littlefinger is putting on this show, but he's not willing to be in a kind of sticky situation with Ned. Littlefinger says he will go back to the City Watch. Another subtle wink of Littlefinger having power over them. And so, yeah, this chapter really is about, again, pointing the Lannisters as the bad guys and Ned is the good guy, but I just want to look at kind of this from Jaime's point of view. Tyrion has been captured on a crime that Jaime straight up knows he did not commit. And from that point of view, it's like, okay, so if you're reading this from Jaime's point of view, we know he's a very arrogant character at this point. The Starks and the Tullys have just captured your brother for no reason, basically. And you really love your brother. So you're going to do anything to try and get them back. And Jaime may not be going about it the right way, but he is trying, at least. He cares about Tyrion more than anyone else does at this point. But that'll get us into page 383. As they let Littlefinger pass, Ned knew they could not win this with military might. They were 3 against 20. Again, showing that Ned's not an idiot. Ned realizes he can't cut his way out of this. And Ned is someone that is constantly thinking about a fight, military strategy. If we go back to the Crossroad Inns, what is one of the things we talked about in that chapter was the idea of how Ned was psychoanalyzing, okay, the Hound, Jaime are not here. So if we have to get into this fight to get Arya out of here, we can, right? We have a better chance. So Ned is kind of always constantly going through that in his head. Ned tries a different approach here, again showing he's not an idiot, but he states that if he kills him, right, and kills him meaning Ned, Cat will kill Tyrion. Jaime does not think this is likely, which I kind of find odd, right? We know how Catelyn and Ned have it would appear a good relationship. So you would think that if you kill Ned, like, yeah, Catelyn would have no second thoughts. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's a weird statement from Jaime. Kind of I think a misread of who Catelyn is as a character. Like, yes, Catelyn is, honorable, or she tries to be. But if you go killing her loved ones, and she's just going to do that, right? I disagree with that idea from Jaime. But Ned says that he will allow Ned to go because, again, he doesn't want to take that chance of Tyrion dying to go tell Robert of Jaime's ambush. As Jaime is readying to leave, he states that he will not let the wolves go unscathed, though, and orders his men to kill Ned's, but do no harm to him. Now, this is the big difference. Whereas in this background image, we see that Jaime is ready to fight Ned, ready to kill Ned's men. This is kind of work that's beneath Jaime, right? It's 3 on 20. Jaime isn't needed. He basically is the only one that is mounted. He just kind of trots away and lets his men do the work. And again, one of the biggest changes from the show and book in season 1 is the idea that Ned and Jaime fight. These two characters do not fight in this little battle. Ned screams no, reaching for his sword instantly. Weil is pulled from his saddle and killed. Jory attempts to help them, to Ned's horror. Again, Ned understands what's going on here. Jory should get as far away as he possibly can because Ned's not going to die. They don't really care about Ned in this situation. They are caring about Weil and Jory. So Jory comes back to Ned's horror, and at this moment, Ned then kills Jaime's captain of the guard, and others perish, but it isn't enough, which leads us into the last page of the chapter, page 384. At this moment, Ned's horse comes crashing down into the mud on top of Ned's leg. Ned saw them pull Jory from his saddle, and once again, Ned's man was killed, this time being Jory. His horse was unable to rise, but Ned himself was not able to. He was in excruciating pain. The Lannisters' men left, and many people who had been watching continued to watch. They did not help. They did nothing in the situation. But eventually, Littlefinger and the City Watch found Ned cradling Jory's corpse. The trip back to the Red Keep was awful. For Ned, it was so painful he slipped in and out of consciousness. Eventually, he gets there, and the only thing that he can see or remember is Pycelle giving him milk of the poppy for the pain. Again, very similar to after Tyrion's injuries at the Battle of the Blackwater. And this is really, again, those consequences we talk about with that Catelyn chapter, really the last couple Catelyn chapters, and how that affects Ned, right? You just put a big red X on Ned when you start this conflict with the Lannisters, and Ned was not prepared for it, obviously. And I don't think Ned thought they would make a strike like this towards him, because again, they have Tyrion prisoner. So if you again kill Ned, well, Tyrion dies. That's kind of the whole idea there. It's something we're going to see kind of play out with the idea of Jaime being captured, and then also like Sansa. So like if you kill one, the other one's probably going to die. Kind of that situation. And so, yeah, we see some of the consequences of the earlier bad decisions made by Catelyn kind of come back rearing their ugly head. But again, like I said, guys, a very short chapter. This one's, well under 30 minutes. One of the shortest ones we've had in a while, but I hope you guys all enjoyed. A very impactful chapter, very important to the story. And I will see you guys all in the next video.